Hello everyone, and welcome to this session on the COVIDSafe app teardown and panel discussion. Hopefully you can all see and hear me okay. We do have the Q&A open if anybody wants to leave responses. I'll check that quickly just in case anyone's saying we can't hear anything. Okay, no, looks good so far. All right, I'll carry on. So the people who'll be speaking to you today are from various parts of Australia, and I know watching at home you'll be spread even further afield, some even from beyond our borders here in Australia. So I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of country throughout Australia and recognising their continuing connection to land, waters and culture. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. Where I am right now, the traditional owners are the Garigal people and the Guringai people. That will be different for all of us, and we acknowledge and pay our respects to them all. The COVIDSafe app has been available for a short while now and has had a great rate of take-up. The last official figures I saw placed it well over 2 million downloads. That may well get commented on a bit later on. A number of countries have been implementing apps like this. Singapore deployed an app amongst their populace, and the source code for that app formed the initial basis of the Australian COVIDSafe app. The UK is planning on releasing a similar app within 2 weeks and are touting this as a key step in being able to relax restrictions and begin to open up the economy again. And we're seeing the same here. And again, there may be some comments on that a little later. But in any event, there's lots of far-reaching implications for a humble app. Now, I know that many of you have concerns around privacy and security when it comes to using an app like this. I'm hoping that the speakers we have here tonight and the subsequent panel discussion will address these concerns as far as is possible. Whilst, of course, it's fine to have concerns, it's important, and I think critically important, given the impact this app can have, that any concerns are based on established facts and not on rumour and gossip. One example, I saw yesterday on social media a screenshot of a scam SMS claiming that the app had reported the user had strayed more than 20 kilometers from their home and just please click this innocuous link to register your reason. This is an established scam preying on fears, as scams often do. It's currently being investigated by federal police. It's been widely reported, but I still saw responses like, that's exactly why I'm not installing the app. Those of us in the tech community with the ability to answer questions like this and to propagate accurate information have a distinct social responsibility to do so. With us tonight, we have a group of people with those abilities and a keen sense of that shared responsibility. Troy Hunt is a very well-known name in the IT community and beyond. He's the creator and owner of haveibeenpwned.com. And for those not familiar with the expression, that's haveibeenpwned.com, where you can enter your email address and check to see if your details have been included in a data breach. He's been called on to provide expert opinion to US Congress and is frequently quoted by news organizations both here and abroad, including the BBC, whenever a knowledgeable voice is required to speak about data breaches and web security. I'll skip over to Troy now just to say hi. Should be with you any second. Yep, you're up, Troy.
Good day, everyone. I'm here.
Yeah, a little bit of switching around here. Next, Matthew Robbins is an established app developer and creator of the mFractor development tool that many app developers around the world make extensive use of in their day-to-day work, myself included. His inquisitiveness combined with his technical ability have been key factors in bringing us all here today. And any second now he should appear. Here's Matt. Welcome, Matt.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. It's cool to be able to, explain our findings tonight.
So next up will be Geoffrey Huntley, who is also a well-known name in the Australian tech community. I've described him as a fierce and vocal advocate of open source, and I think that's accurate. He's a prolific contributor to many open source projects and a regular speaker at both large conferences and small community events, and should be on your screens in a second.
Cheers, Alex. Thank you, everyone, for joining in tonight.
We just want to try to move the narrative past security and provide some facts, right? So we can focus on things that matters. So thank you.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks, Geoff. Thanks very much. And next we'll have Kate Carruthers. Kate is Chief Data and Insights Officer for the University of New South Wales, Sydney, and an adjunct senior lecturer in the School of Computer Science and Engineering. She's a co-founder of a number of startups, a senior member of the Institute of Electrical and Electronic Engineers, and a member of the New South Wales Government Data Analytics Centre Advisory Board, and should be appearing on your screens any moment now to say hi. Thanks very much for joining us, Kate. I think you're up now. Oh, you're on mute, sorry.
It's the modern way. Sorry about that. So I'm really glad to be here because I think we can bring some calm, rational reasoning to this issue.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks ever so much, Kate. And finally, I'm Alec Tucker. I've been an app developer since, sad but true, 1998, before they were called apps. I'm active in the local tech community here in Sydney, and I've also spoken at local and international conferences on the subject of app development and app security. So that's who you're listening to tonight. The format of the evening will be as follows. First of all, for those who haven't installed the app, I'm about to walk you through the process using some of the screen mock-ups from the project, and we'll see what the app looks like from the outside. Then I'll hand over to Troy to give us all his perspective on the security and privacy implications at play. After that, Matt will give us a walkthrough of his methods and findings as he performed his investigations into the COVIDSafe app, and we'll get our first look at the internals. Then Geoff has brought together the tech community, coordinating input from many other people, as well as performing his own investigations. We'll try and credit some of them, but we'll no doubt miss people. But just know that there are more people working on this than you'll see and hear of tonight. This really has been a coordinated response by the Australian tech community, and Geoff will give us his take on those activities and their findings. And we'll then move on to the panel discussion. We've got no shortage of questions to respond to sent in advance. We'll try and keep an eye on the questions coming in via the Q&A. We'll have to see what rate they're coming in at and if which ones we're able to respond to. But I think we've got enough to be going on with at any rate. So the first thing that we will do is I will share my screen and hopefully you can all see that. If one of the other presenters can just give me an audible. Cool, thanks, Geoff. Step ahead of me. Yeah. Okay, so let me just whiz back to the start of this. So the first screen, this is assuming that you've found the app in your app store. We'll have some comments later on making sure you're using bona fide app store and getting the bona fide app. This is assuming you've installed it and you're running it for the first time. There's a bit of information here just on what the app is, and key thing here is COVIDSafe will securely record contacts that you have with other users of the app. That's probably the point that if anyone has concerns, that's where they are. So a little later, Matt and Geoff will be digging into exactly what that looks like and exactly what that sharing looks like. I do like the fact that the only button there is I want to help. Presumably, if you don't want to help, you're on your own trying to figure out what to do next. There's a bit of blurb next talking about how the app is using Bluetooth rather than GPS location tracking. We will dive into the actual nuts and bolts of this a little later as to how the phones are communicating with each other. There are then links to the privacy policy, pointing out that use of this app is completely voluntary, and sharing here that in order to
Alec,
register.
we can't see the screen.
Oh.
The public can't see the screen.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for that, Matt. Sorry, everyone.
No worries. Just keep an eye on it.
Okay. So the screens have looked like this, so pretty much like this so far. Let me just see if I can navigate back. I'll just show you what was on the screen while I was talking. So pretty much, yeah, the introductory text that I was walking through. The point what I was going to point out on this screen was the note here that in order to register, what information do we need to provide? So you'll need to enter your name, or it's good to note here that a pseudonym is considered acceptable. You'll need a mobile number, an age range, and a postcode. And then there's the consent. They're asking for consent to upload and store the information that you enter in order to register, and for your consent if somebody that you have been in contact with wants to upload the fact that they've been in contact with you. And here's where we first ask for details. Now I'm quickly going to just jump out and remove my screen just for a moment or two, because the mock-ups that we have got all of Geoff's personal details, including his phone number, entered. So rather than broadcast all of that, I'm pretty sure I've got the broadcast screen correct now, so you can see my face. I'll describe what I'm seeing anyway. There's a screen that asks for your phone number to be entered. It gives you the +61 and then leaves the rest available for you to type in. So it does have to be a mobile number. We have had people not sure if to include the 0 or not. I've assumed not to include the 0. I haven't actually tested if it works if you do, but it's probably no great shakes. But if you don't include the 0 as advice. Once you've entered that, you should then, and pressed next, you should receive a text message with a 6-digit code. This will be familiar to a lot of people as a way to activate an app, just to confirm that you do actually own that number that you gave it. Once you receive that SMS, there's a screen that you get taken to type it in and hit a verify button. And now it should be safe for me to switch back to show you the screens that I'm seeing. Now I've got all Geoff's details off my screen. This is where it gets a little bit interesting. So these are the mock-ups for the Android app. And it's saying COVIDSafe needs Bluetooth and notifications enabled in order to work. So on iOS, those are the only permissions that you should be asked for. On Android, however, you get select proceed to enable Bluetooth and location permissions and the battery optimizer. And a lot of people have asked, why are we enabling location permissions? So we will dive into that, if not during Matt and Geoff's sessions. We've got an app prepped for the panel to go into exactly what's going on there and why we're being asked for that on Android. And then a little more fine-grained permission required for that location. So Android also is asking for permission to run in the background, and what's pretty much a standard warning for any apps that request that permission that it may impact battery life. And again, I'm sure that will come up in the discussion. So at this point, we have successfully installed the app. We've successfully registered. And there's a note here saying, please basically don't disable push notifications. There are some mechanisms in place to encourage us to keep the app running and to keep the app in the foreground. We do also have a question ready for the panel about whether or not the app does have to run in the foreground and what happens if it's not. So we will dive into that a little later as well. This then is what the app will look like when it's running. You're fully registered, the app is up and running, and when we talk about a foreground app, it means that the app is filling your screen. That's what you can see at the moment. You do have some help options in here if you want to find out a bit more about the app, what it's doing, how it's working. I'll jump back here. There's one more section that I want to show you if I scroll down, and that is if you test positive, what happens? Now, the theory is if you test positive, a health official will ask you if you will upload if you're prepared to upload your data. So then you would tap this button and there's a separate consent to complete. Your data will only be uploaded from your phone if you specifically consent here. And at this point, there's another PIN confirmation. So I'll briefly switch back to me. That's it for the demo. So that's what the app looks like from the outside. fairly soon we'll dive into what it looks like from the inside. But before we do that, I'm going to hand over to Troy to tell us a bit about security and privacy and a bit of the mood at the moment. So you should be on screen any second, Troy. There you go.
All right, thanks, Alec. So look, we sort of had a bit of a chat about how to set some context here, and I put out a couple of somewhat lengthy Twitter threads. One 13 days ago when we started getting a lot of news about the fact that we were going to get a contact tracing app, and then another a couple of days ago after it launched, and I downloaded it, and that got a lot of engagement. And I thought what I'd do is sort of go through the highlights of that, try and set a little bit of context around the things that originally I was saying I would like to see in an app in order to have confidence in the privacy and security of it, and then sort of taking a little bit of a look at what we've got, and particularly where I think we have, what's a kind way of putting this? Perhaps not a balanced look of privacy and the impact of this on privacy. So look, the first thing is that we saw this launch in Singapore called Trace Together more than a couple of weeks ago now. So there was a precedent. The Australian app is closely related to the one from Singapore. So we had a little bit of a sense of what it was going to look like. And one of the things I said initially in this thread is that this is an unprecedented time, and we're all doing unprecedented things. And frankly, the government saying, here's an app, we'd like you to install this, and it's going to see who you come in contact with, is not something that we would have done a few months ago. Likewise, I wouldn't have barely gone outside the house a few months ago. So we're all sort of doing some rather unusual, exceptional things that we hope are meant to be short term. So look, as I go through this thread, when I look back the one a couple of weeks ago, one of the things that I was sort of hedging towards here was to say I think it is worth making some concessions to our lifestyle and potentially to our privacy in order to get the upside, which is not just healthiness, but getting the economy back on track and hopefully getting all this behind us as soon as possible. And someone actually suggested to me, they said, look, I think your framing of this is wrong, because the framing implies that there is a loss of privacy. And seeing now the way the app works, I really don't feel that that's the case, but I think we'll get into that as we go along. And one of the things that I find kind of fascinating, just looking back through what stood out in this tweet thread, and this, look, normally I'd write really long blog posts about this, and instead I just wrote like a really long tweet thread because I think there's just so much relevant stuff. And one of the things that I feel is really fascinating is that we're all walking around with these amazing devices in our pockets. They're literally freaking supercomputers with Bluetooth and geolocation and 3G capability and all the other things that go into a modern smartphone. And it's amazing that we actually have the technical capability just to take a piece of software and it can start to look at where we might have had at-risk contact. So as a pure geek technologist, I think that's super cool. And of course, now the trick is how do we use that to do good things without compromising on things that we just shouldn't be compromising on. So as we sort of go along through this, one of the things I pointed out originally is that the anonymization model is going to be really key. So how can we collect this information such that it is sufficient to see who we've come into contact with, that we can actually provide that information to authorities if we test positive at some point, and then we can trace it back together, but then we don't give away anything that we don't absolutely have to. And one of the things I think is really key here when we talk about security or privacy, and that the two are distinct but very often related, is not to sort of look at the thing in isolation, but rather to say, this proposed model, how does this change from what we would have without this model? So for example, in this case, I think the question that we need to be asking is not whether COVIDSafe is private, is secure, rather, if we don't run this app, what is different? So for example, if you do test positive today, my understanding, keep in mind I'm not a health professional, but my understanding is you'll get a very lengthy questionnaire from a health professional about all of your interactions. You will have a government record that says you have tested positive, and every single thing you can think of in terms of where you've been and who you've come over into contact with for the last couple of weeks will be on the record. So what I think is interesting with this app is the way it generally attempts to emulate that in a digital sense. So collect information, store it locally. If you test positive, then we'll put the stuff up onto government servers, and effectively emulate the same thing you'd have to do in person. The difference being, of course, is that being digital and automated, it does collect a lot more information, but the paradigm's still the same. So the retention periods, I think, is interesting. And I made the point back here on April 16. I said the data is only of finite use in terms of the validity of looking at who you've come into contact with. So, for example, if we're running this thing 3 months from now, who I come into contact today is absolutely irrelevant, because by then I've either showed symptoms, I've been tested, or I've passed on to someone else, or I've recovered. It's just too long a period. And I sort of said at the time, if we can keep that period finite, and when Geoff and Matt talk about the teardown later on, they'll talk about what they've found with retention periods. I like the principle of you cannot lose what you do not have. So can we get rid of data when we don't need it as soon as possible? And then at least your worst case scenario, if everything on the device gets disclosed at some point, is you have a small window of time, the smallest possible window of time. I was very enthusiastic about the idea of open sourcing it as well. And I appreciate there's probably some people in here who are not necessarily technological as well. So that the principle of open sourcing it is to say, look, the publisher of the application, the Oz government in this case, should make the code available for other people to review. Now that hasn't happened as of yet. There's a lot of discussion that it will happen. There's a little bit of government politician speak in there somewhere as well. But as much as I think this is still important to do from an intent perspective, as you'll see from the guys later on when they do their teardown, we have all the source anyway. So from a mechanical perspective, we know exactly what it does now. Now, I also said I'd really like to see this being opt-in. Of course, it is opt-in at the moment. The government has said a few things at times which does worry me and others a little bit, in terms of it may not be optional in the future if they didn't get the traction. What we now know, I think as of yesterday afternoon, we had about, well, actually the expectation, my understanding was the expectation was they'd like to get to about 1 million installs after a week. Now instead, as of yesterday afternoon, which is what, about 48 hours in, I think we're at about 2.5 million installs. So clearly it's well and truly exceeding expectation. And hopefully that means we will never get to the point where it does get mandated. So I'd prefer not to speculate on whether that's going to happen in the future, because if we keep on this trajectory, it looks like it won't. Now, one of the things that I am a bit passionate about is when we get sensationalization around privacy or risks, which is just incommensurate with reality. And one of the sort of positions that I see a lot, not just related to COVID trace, but in general, particularly around security, is the absolutes. Is it secure versus not secure? Is it private versus not private? And one of the things I keep seeing coming up is people say, I don't want to give up my privacy. And so what? So like you had privacy and then you install COVIDSafe and now you have no privacy. Like it's not that binary. It's a lot more nuanced. And don't let the irony escape you of the fact that they're on Twitter, one of the world's largest social media platforms, talking about this either. So what we've really got to look at is, rather than saying, is it private, is it not private, is it secure, is it not private, or not secure, what does it actually look like? And again, to the earlier point, how is it different to if we didn't have it? So that's a much more informed discussion to have. And I think as we go through this today, I'm sure Kate will have some comments on that as well. One of the sort of strongest senses I get in watching this thing roll out is just a vehement distrust of government. And I've seen many references of everything from NSA and Snowden through to, the Australian government did a terrible job of running the census in 2016. They're incapable of running an IT project. And again, that just grossly oversimplifies the situation. The census of 2016 was an absolute mess. I was there trying to fill it out. I remember what it was like. I don't think we can take one project like this, or even a handful of projects, and say, look, the government is incapable of running this. And as I said to a number of people, I said, well, which projects do you think they ran well? And they're like, well, I don't know. So yeah, exactly, because they are never in the news. You don't read about all the planes that landed safely. You read about the one that crashed into the mountain. So we do have somewhat of a skewed view of how successful projects are. Now, that's not to say the government hasn't messed up a bunch of them. They clearly have. But as I saw, I think it was some of Jeff's comments over the last few days, software is a complex thing as well, and we should expect that there are going to be some bugs. Now, I sort of summarised it a couple of weeks ago, said, look, this has the potential to be high value, low risk, and that we should all want it to work, but in a privacy-centric way, because we all want to get through this and get better. Now, as we sort of looked to the thread a couple of days ago, now that we actually have the app and I've installed it, I sort of went through the process which Alec has just described. Everyone knows how to install it now. It is a very basic, simple thing. It's literally like 2 minutes of your time, but I don't think anyone's kind of debating the effort angle of it. What I found really interesting as I installed this now, what was it, just over 48 hours ago, I got in the day after, was how quickly people pulled it apart. So in this thread, you know, like the afternoon, I think it was probably the evening because it launched late in the day, didn't it? Matt had already started to pull it apart and write a good thread on it. So one of the things I think is really fascinating about this is that the community is picking the thing to pieces and holding the government accountable. You say it does this, does it really? Let us check. And one of the interesting things in here, and I'm sure Geoff will talk about this too because he shared a bunch of the source, is that as much as we wanted it to be open source, and I still want it to be open source, again, for transparency, a bunch of people said, well, if it's open source and the government puts the source out there for you to review, how do you know that that's the one which is then installed on your device? So that the answer to that question is the guys have pulled it down, reverse engineered it, and literally said, this is the code that the government is shipping. So from a mechanical perspective, we're actually in an even better position. So a couple of other things in here, obviously the 21-day retention, which is super, super important. The data only ever being uploaded if you test positive. I'm sure the guys will speak more about that. And again, this is things that we are now seeing that is evidence-based from review of the code. This is not the health minister says we'll do this, therefore we should trust the guide. I think it's sort of the old, you know, trust but verify. So these are the people that are now actually verifying this. We've obviously had massive adoption rates. That was another point here. There was a comment on here as well I thought was really interesting from Mike Cannon-Brook. So he's a fellow Aussie who's a co-founder of Atlassian and has done exceptionally well for himself. And he used a term here where he posted on Hacker News, which is a massively popular technology aggregator, and he encouraged people to turn angry mob mode off. And this is, it's possibly an inflammatory term, but it's also quite apt because what I'm seeing over and over again is people having a dialogue which is not constructive. It's just from the outset angry and hostile. And I again, I can only sort of speculate that this is just a general distrust in government as opposed to unhappiness with the actual execution of the software itself. And again, we're going to tear this apart and talk more about it in detail. So look, I sort of summarised the whole thing by saying by any reasonable measure, COVIDSafe is itself safe. It still won't stop people chiming in on this thread on one of the world's largest social media platforms, funded by profiling your usage of it and targeting ads at you from saying it will erode their privacy. So look, that's sort of my view on it. I think that when we look at it on a very balanced position and we say, how does it change privacy and who is it that is impacted by privacy? The largest concern we'd have is those who test positive uploading their data. Look, if it was me and I just tested positive to a virus which is killing the number of people it is, I think the last thing I'd be worried about is have my contacts from the last couple of weeks been given to the government. I'd be much more worried about actually getting better and not infecting other people around me. So a little bit of subjectivity there on the end, but I think that is sort of the way we need to think about this thing. So how does it change privacy from if we didn't have this? So Alec, I might throw back to you to go on to the next panelist.
And I took my turn to be the one to forget to switch off mute. Thanks very much for that, Troy. Yeah, that's a great perspective, and looking forward to more of that in the panel discussion a little later. We do have some side discussion taking place in the Q&A bar. If you're not able to access that, then look out in the top right-hand corner for an icon that looks like two speech bubbles with a question mark in them. Hopefully you can get into there. Some of the things that are being discussed are things that I think we will probably still go through in the panel discussion anyway, just to make sure everybody's been across them. But in the meantime, next up, we've got Matt, who's going to roll his sleeves up and do what I'm sure a lot of you are here to see. So just switching screens now, and over to you, Matt, you're up.
Thanks, Alec. I am going to immediately launch into screen sharing because I will be diving right into the source code and kind of, well, the method that I was using to to reverse engineer the app. So before I kind of dive into how I did it, I would like to just backtrack and give some information on myself, kind of where I come from and how I ended up, I guess, doing that investigation and making that tweet. So I've been a professional app developer for the past 8 years. I started doing applications in 2012. Over that time, I've done everything from Android apps to iOS apps. I've worked for many, many businesses. I've probably shipped upwards of 30 apps now. And I guess importantly, I also build developer tools. So I come from a background where I make apps and I also build tooling to assist in the development of apps. So as such, I've kind of ended up with a fairly in-depth knowledge of the tool chain and kind of, as developers, how we put apps together. So that's kind of where I come from. In terms of, why I published that tweet and why I did the investigation that I did. I've been planning on reverse engineering the app for a couple of weeks when I knew that it was coming on the horizon. Mostly my original intention was to get an idea, I guess, of, did the app do what it said it do? We've got this label saying it does X, Y, and Z. Does it actually do that? Is there anything that is underhanded into it? What's the engineering quality like? Really just trying to answer a lot of my own questions. And I composed those findings into that Twitter thread that for me was rather astonishing, just the reach that it's had. Mostly I guess I thought that my peers in the industry would be interested in my findings. I didn't expect that it would reach so many people. I'm quite thrilled that it did reach so many people. And yeah, I'm really happy that my findings could, I guess, help people make an informed decision on if the application was right for them, and also kind of assuade any concerns they might have. All right, let's dive in. Let's go into the actual, this is how you reverse engineer an application. This is how I came to the conclusions that I came to. First of all, you want to download your app. So to do that, you head over to the Google Play Store. You find the COVID link. By the way, if you're on a computer, on a Mac specifically, you can do these same steps and follow along. I would really recommend it. It's not too difficult, and it'll be very, very enlightening as well. Okay, anyway, back on topic. So you can grab this URL. So the COVIDSafe application ID. Head over onto this website called APK Combo. Basically, any website that downloads that takes a Google Play link and turns it into an APK download, that's really what we're after. We just want to get the APK file. So the APK is what you install onto your Android phone. And we need that to, I guess, open up and start peeking under the hood. So I stuck in the package ID. I believe you can also put in the Google Play URL. So if I jump back to this, and we'll do this from scratch actually. And I delete that, hit enter, and stick in the Google Play ID. It gives me an option to download the zip file. So if you want to download that, that'll contain the APK, so the archive we need to open up in a second. And then importantly, the main tool that we're using for this is this incredibly good open source tool called JADX, so JADX. Now this is a Java decompiler, and also you can open up Android packages. So it's really, really useful for us to basically grab any kind of application that we want that's published on the Play Store. We can feed it into this piece of software, and it gives us this nice visual way of exploring and I guess poking around at the internals. So if you scroll down, you'll find the area called download and download from GitHub. So I've already got this open, so I'll just jump across to it. And you can download this JADX-1 1.0.zip, and that contains the executable. So it contains the tool that we'll use to do what we need to do. Now I've already pre-downloaded this just because I don't want to be downloading while presenting. So where's my downloads? And just for the sake of clarity, I'll kill that. Okay, so I'm in my downloads folder. I have got the COVIDSafe zip file. I've extracted that. That's the application bundle that the government's distributing. I have my JetX tool. If I go into the bin folder and double click on JetX GUI, it'll kick up a window that we can use to then open up any APK file. I'll go to my downloads folder and go to COVIDSafe and then crack open the APK. So the immediate thing that we'll see is on the left-hand side here. So we've got source code. Awesome, that's what we want. JetX has effectively taken the internals of the app and converted it from this intermediate language called DEX, so DEX. I'm not going to go too far into that. And it's taken all the data that's in that particular file and it's converted it back to an approximation of the source code that we want to see, which is awesome because it means that we can start peeking in and seeing how things are implemented. Now we're interested in the au.gov.health.covidsafe area. So we'll open that up. And one of the immediate things that stood out to me when I was undergoing this process myself, you'll see that everything is named correctly. So everything has clear naming. In my Twitter thread, I spoke about a process called obfuscating. More or less, obfuscating is taking compiled code, so code that a computer can read, and mashing it up to a way that it can't be converted back to its original source code. So it's effectively a scrambling routine to add security so that we can't perform this process. So because we could reverse it from its intermediate language back to this and see the original kind of naming, this app hasn't been obfuscated. It hasn't been scrambled, and it means that we can dig in and really verify that it's saying that the application is doing what the government says. It's kind of like it's all there for us to dig into. Now I'm going to dive into three main features, so three main parts of this application, and we'll kind of walk through like what it means, kind of how it's put together. The first one is how the data is stored, and also what is stored and where it is stored. Next, we're going to dive into the Bluetooth connectivity. So that's broadcasting a Bluetooth signal and how other apps receive that broadcast signal. And then lastly, talking about where data transfer occurs, kind of like the scope of it. So what parts of the app transfer data, where is that limited to? Okay, so first of all, we want to look into the database layer. So we want to kind of verify the data is being stored where they say it's being stored. So if you go into, if I go into this area called street pass and then persistence, we have a whole bunch of classes. So street pass record, pass record DAO, repository storage. But what we're interested in is this street pass record database. So if you double click on that, it'll crack open that particular class. And there we go. We basically have the original source code that we can browse. Now, for me, when I opened this up, the thing that immediately stood out was that it inherits from this class called a room database. So it's actually really simple. You can take that room database and do a Google search for Android room database, and it'll take you to the original documentation. So you can kind of verify with the original authors how it behaves. Now let's just jump in and see where it's constructed. So if I scroll down on this line 41 area, we have a room.database builder. So this constructs a new database. It's taking context, class, What we're interested in is this name, so record database. This is the name of the database or the file location of the database. Now, something that's really interesting here is that it doesn't specify a physical file path. And because it doesn't do that, it's going to be placed automatically in the app's private area. So this is an area of the Android operating system that is only accessible to COVIDSafe. So external apps like, I don't know, Facebook or like your file browser, they physically will not be able to access this unless your phone is jailbroken. And we'll get to the implications of that later. And we can verify this isn't going to an externally exposed file path by simply checking the permissions. So in Android, you have to declare what parts of the operating system you're planning on using. If you don't and you try to use those parts, your app will crash or Google simply won't publish it. And they're declared in this file called the Android manifest. So under resources, Android manifest. And we're looking for two permissions here. We're looking for read external storage and write external storage. So if I just search for read, we get no hits. If I search for write, we also get no hits. So the app is it's incapable of accessing the external file system. The database is only ever created and I guess available for use inside its own scope. You can verify these permissions by heading over to the Android documentation. So write external storage allows an application to write to external storage. And we have read external storage. So allows an application to read from external storage. And COVIDSafe simply doesn't have those. It can't access external file paths. In terms of what's being stored, we can dive back into that persistence layer. So street pass persistence. We can take a look at the street pass records. So the ID, I guess a unique ID. So this is where things get a little bit interesting because the variable names are a bit hard to read. I might leave this to possibly one of the later presenters to dive into this, but it's effectively storing a unique key of the other device that was broadcasting when it detected that other device broadcasting, and also the signal strength of when it detected. And from those data points, you can get a reasonably good idea of if you've come into contact with someone for longer than 15 minutes, and if you need to, I guess, check in for infection and an infection test. So that's the database layer. I will try to dive into some questions a little bit later, but I'm going to jump straight onto the Bluetooth layer and just kind of explore how that works. So if you're playing along at home, you can go to the ae.gov.health.covidsafe area. Under Bluetooth, we have two classes. So we have the BLE advertiser and the BLE scanner. So these do, I guess, complementary behaviors. The BLE advertiser, that's broadcasting our app, I guess, to other phones that also have COVIDSafe installed. And the scanner is what detects those other phones broadcasting to us. So we'll start with the advertiser. And we're really only interested in this one method here. So the start advertising and start advertising legacy, and kind of what it builds up. Now, there's a few things that immediately stood out to me when I was going through this process. The first one is we want to look into this advertiser data class, and it includes all these different fields. So for instance, the service UUID, this is a unique, basically an SSID, so a signal identifier that only COVIDSafe apps are listening to. So someone asked a question before, Does it detect every other Bluetooth device? No, it doesn't, because it's only looking for this one particular kind of Bluetooth signal, and that's what the COVIDSafe app broadcasts. It adds a unique identifier for the broadcasting session. So this is just a random identifier that they create. And the thing that really stood out for me is that it has this set include device name false. So when it's broadcasting, it's not actively broadcasting the actual device name. And all of this goes into basically a data bundle. The Bluetooth implementation on Android just occasionally pulses out and starts advertising in this start advertising method. So that's the communications aspect of it. So sending out data. The data is received by this class called the BLE scanner. This gets set up much in a similar way as the advertiser. It's set up with a service UUID. So in the start scan method, the service UUID is matched at the same UUID as what the advertiser is broadcasting, and a bit of other functionality happening here, but effectively we want to start looking at the scan callback after they've started the scanning. So we'll jump out, and what we can do is we can locate where this scan method is called by right-clicking and going find usage. And this will search the code base for everything that references that one method, and it'll allow us to isolate what's using it. But it's on Struggle Street. There we go. Okay, so it's declared here. The only place that starts it is this start scan and the street pass scanner. So we'll double click and jump to that. That's passing a scan callback. That's what we want to see, how it receives data. So we'll go to that. So right click, go to declaration. That's a BLE scan callback. We'll right click, we'll go to that. There's a bit of detective work that's involved in kind of reversing and understanding an application. And we're mostly interested in this, well, we're only interested in this process scan result and what it grabs. So this is the callback that's receiving the data that's sent out by this BLE advertiser. And I'll just close that and jump back in. So it grabs the device. So that's the Bluetooth connection to the other device. We'll use that. That'll be used a little bit later. It grabs the signal strength. It grabs an address. And where are we at? It then sends that out using this broadcast device scanned. And this is picked up by another part of the system that effectively captures those key points of information and puts it into the local database that we explored earlier. And that's more or less how it works in terms of the Bluetooth flow. And I'm happy to take some questions on that a little bit later during the panel. Last part, and possibly the most important part, is how does this data that's just been collected and stored, when does that get uploaded and how does that get uploaded? Now we can look into this by going into the networking area and then doing service. So it has this AWS client class or interface, and this contains the web API methods that are used to take that locally stored SQL database and push it up over the wire. So using standard web technologies onto the government servers. And what we're actually interested in, we're interested in these re-upload methods. So if we do a search for where the AWS client is used, so again, right click, find usages, we get a bit of noise, but you can see that we have these things called use cases that effectively encapsulate kind of one piece of behavior that the app's trying to achieve. And we're interested in this one called the upload data use case. So as the name suggests, upload data will upload data, and we can basically jump in and see what it's doing here. So that takes the AWS client, HTTP client for doing the transmission, and it has this this run method. So this is what's uploading the data. So the next thing we want to do is we want to find where this upload data use case is being called. So we can right click on it and do find usage. And this will list all the places that data upload is physically possible in the application. So we can ignore all of these first ones because it's just referring to that particular class that we just had open. And you'll notice that there's only one other class that is referencing that particular use case. So if we jump back a couple of steps and we trace kind of like the network stack, we had the AWS client that was only used by the upload data use case or the generate one-time PIN use case. We're interested in the upload data behavior. So we're trying to see where everything in upload data is being used. That's only ever used in one place, which is the verify PIN upload presenter. Now this is kind of like the glue between what's displayed on the UI, you pressing buttons, and then what happens under the hood. So we can jump into this and just kind of see what happens. So it has this upload data release, and here this is effectively where the upload routine is happening. So it's one place. It only happens after you've verified and created a one-time use code, and it's over HTTPS, and it's also authenticated using. So if we go to resources res raw, we have these .pem files. So this is a public key for cryptography, for encryption, and so it's encrypted using these .pem files, and only the private key holder, which is the government server, can actually decrypt this. So that's effectively how the data transmission happens. And yeah, that's more or less kind of how I came to the conclusions that I came to in my Twitter thread. So, you know, by looking at the database layer, we can verify that it's stored privately to the application. We can look at the Bluetooth layer and see how the communication happens between devices and what's being broadcast. And then we can trace how that recorded data in the database is transmitted, and what security methods are in place and where it's transmitted. So yeah, that's effectively how I did it. Hopefully you all played along at home, and I will hand it back to you now, Alec.
Thanks for that, Matt. So a fair bit of meat for everyone to digest there. Hopefully you're all kept up with that and are across it. And if you didn't keep up, don't worry. There'll be opportunities to ask questions to the panel a little later. I'm going to go from that straight into Jeff's talk now, which may go down into a bit more nitty gritty and touch on some of the other community members as well. So Jeff, just switching over to your screen now, reminding you to unmute. Yep, one step ahead of me. Over to you. You're up.
Beautiful. Thank you very much, Alec and Matt. Thank you very much for going through and doing the APK. I'm going to just share out my screen. Hopefully it works here, and I'll run you through some of the lower levels of the application. So just to introduce myself, I'm an open source software engineer. I build software that other software developers use to build apps. I'm also a mobile app developer as well. So let me see if the sharing of the screen is going to work. Can I get a confirmation that you can see that screen?
I will be able to 2 seconds from now. Yeah, that should be it.
Beautiful. Beautiful, 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 beautiful. Yeah, so yeah, quick introductions. Myself, I really got involved because I had the time and the means and the capacity right now to actually dig into it. I'm calling out to a mate of mine, Paul Fenwick, which is a well-known name in the open source community here in Australia. And he just put out this tweet saying, hey, there's a lot of people pulling apart the application. I'm like, oh, wait a sec, how come I haven't thought about that? And I was like, I'd like to do this. And then 30 minutes later, it's like, heck, I'm going to do this. So I have I'm completely volunteer. I've been doing this completely, essentially pro bono QA as a service for the last 72 hours. So that's a little bit about me, but let's get into the application. So what happened was created a Google Doc and decompiled the application and published the source code online. As Troy Hunt mentioned, it is really important to actually have the source code because it allows you to verify, like trust but verify. And actually having the actual source code from the application removes the issues of supply chain attacks, because it's very possible for someone to publish an application, but the source code and the application, there can be a mismatch. This is the actual application source code. So we created this Google Doc, and in this Google Doc, we've basically formed this little community in there. And the community, and I invite you to get in there, we'll get one of the other people in the panel to post the actual link. And we just create this community. There's a lot of people very interested in this, and how do we get the facts, and like how do we scale my efforts, how do we scale Matt's efforts, how do we scale Troy's efforts, how do we scale Kate's efforts. It's just bring in more people, and people look at different aspects and different facets. I look from a software engineering point of view, Troy's looking from a security point of view, Kate's looking from a privacy point of view. So the source code is now published online. If you go to github.com/ghuntley in the top right hand corner, you'll actually see the source code. And I've been looking at it now for about 72 hours, and my gut feels what I've discovered is essentially it is the Singapore source code. It's from the Singapore application, but my gut feel it was like it attained about a month ago before it was open source. Normally when you open source some software, you spend some time doing some cleanup and refactorings, and I'm finding these are missing. So it's just my gut feel. It feels like it's a fork, but before it got open sourced. The Singapore source code is available online on GitHub. It's the open trace community, and it would be my deepest desire when the government actually does release the source code, and there's been a commitment from Greg Hunt to release the source code 2 days ago. And it actually shouted out to a lot of the people in the actual community for all the work that they've done. Didn't name particular names, but that was amazing to see. Thank you. Yeah, so the source code is now available. It's my deepest desire for this code, instead of it being published as the Australian version and the Singapore version, essentially what we've got here is we've now have this thing called Open Trace. And the idea is as more countries need to build contact tracing applications, we really want everyone just using a common base, meaning if Australia discovers a bug and fixes it, they fix it in a common code base. If Singapore discovers a bug, it gets fixed in that code base. Apologies, always happens. So yeah, the idea is we all get, instead of working on our own individual silos, we're just working on a central project, and it all gets better together. I really hope they head this direction when they open source. And then we could get some of the improvements that have been shipped in the Singapore version over the last 2 or 3 weeks. It's just suspicion. So one of the reasons I really got involved in this is because it seems that there was a lot of focus on security, and all the narrative in the media is secure, not secure, is privacy, but really, we've been going through this application. We've found problems with the application that need to be resolved. We're seeing a lot of people in the App Store saying they can't actually install the application. A lot of people on Twitter and social media saying they can't install the application. And rather than like point out these are flaws in the application. What we should really be doing is kind of like what's been shipped is a very good MVP, and we should be now focusing on shipping the next version of the MVP. And we'll go through some of the problems I found, and I really hope that the government actually steps out and acknowledges these and just like gets an update out tomorrow with these fixes. Some of these are going to be really easy to fix. So the first thing is the Australian App Store. The application is only published in the Australian App Store, and that is not a good outcome because a lot of people have immigrated to Australia, or they might be backpackers, and if they can't download it from their native country app store, they can't enroll. So that's the first thing. That's really simple. All they need to do is take the existing application and publish it to all the app stores internationally, fixed, and just keep doing that. It'll be a really good outcome to actually increase the adoption numbers. And that's what we should be focusing on, is enabling people to adopt the application, and a little bit less on security and privacy right now, because it'll allow the security and privacy people in time to continue to review it as application updates are shipped. But number one priority right now is how do we get people into the application. Next one is quite annoying. You're seeing, I saw quite a lot of reports from people they couldn't actually register, and the issue is it actually says you've got an invalid phone number. It's not got nothing to do with invalid phone number. There seems to be a server on the back-end server that the application talks to, and that is blocking non-Australian IP addresses. That makes sense, but the block list itself is blocking Australian IP addresses. And when people are trying to register the application, they can't. It says invalid phone number. And the solution is really simple. Turn off Wi-Fi and then register, and then turn it back on again. Or if you're on 4G, turn on Wi-Fi. I've reported this 2 days ago to the health department, and it got forwarded to the appropriate areas, but I haven't had a proactive response back. I'd really like to establish private channels of communication, so we're not just publicly talking about it. So for some of the people here, it might be the first time they're seeing this, but we've known for like 48 hours some of these things. And it would have been great if this could have been fixed within like 30 minutes or a day or much sooner. Next thing is interesting is SMS itself. I came across this tweet essentially saying that farmers or people in rural and remote areas, they have internet access, they got Wi-Fi, but they can't get mobile phone reception, which means SMS doesn't work. And a common flow that exists when you register for an application these days for software as a service, you get the choice. Do you want SMS or do you want a phone call? So it would be really interesting to see it changing away from just SMS and just like allowing people to put in a phone number, and then a robot calls them and it goes, your PIN is this. And then they just type it in and they're registered, and that would allow the rural and remote community to sign up to the application. There's a segment that is right now having difficulties. The next segment that we kind of identified is roaming. There's this assumption that someone has a Australian mobile phone number, but there are a lot of international business travelers and a lot of people, backpackers who work on these farms in rural remote communities. They don't have a +661 phone number. So just remove this restriction and keep SMS as an option, and it'll allow a bigger amount of people to actually use the application and more uptake. So just confirming exactly what Matt has reiterated before, the GPS is not used. It's absolutely not used. Android, the security model of Android is when you want to use certain programmatic APIs, you need to ask for permission. Unfortunately, on Android, the permission is not granular enough. It does not allow you to say, I just want to scan for Bluetooth. No, you've got to ask for the permission that enables GPS and scanning for Bluetooth. So that's a concern, and this is tripping a lot of people up. So reviewing the source code, there is no implementation of the GPS at all. The APIs aren't there. What it does do is it essentially creates a Bluetooth advertiser that advertises that you're using the application. And then instead, it has a scanner, and these two components, they go backwards and forwards saying, I've got the COVID app. Do you have the COVID app? And then it's recording those information. And there's quite a lot of really good research that was published by the Singapore team, where they've actually done a whole bunch of calibration for this, because Bluetooth is radio-based. It doesn't have properties of distance at all. It has properties of like signal strength or device identifier, or if the connection was successful, or how long the connection was for. It has no notion of like location. But there has been like they did do some serious work. They actually got chambers and they started working this out and plotting it out. The researchers there, I'll get one of the other panelists to actually put that link. But not only that, there's actually academic papers that have been looking into this, actually working on proving that this is an effective way of estimating distance, which we'll get one of the panelists to drop in. So this is one of the main findings. Is a lot of the commentary it's about distance. The application itself does not contain any logic about how far someone is away. What is essentially happening is, if you consent to upload your data because you have been contacted because you have COVID, it will upload all the interactions from your local phone, and it does server-side processing. This is smart because the mathematical model behind the figuring out the location, the distance, because the radio doesn't have these properties, it allows them to adjust and improve the model later without having to ship new software updates. It's actually good, but it does have privacy implications, which I'm sure Kate will have some points on. But yeah, it's server-side processing to work out the distance. Now, we've confirmed that the data is deleted after 21 days. If you were to walk along the street and come in contact with me on the 1st, on the 23rd, that reference and record is removed from the phone. Again, all your data is kept locally on your device, and old records are expired. So really it comes down to that the only time that your data will leave your phone is because you've consented to upload it. And because it uses the Room database API, as Matt mentioned, it's stored securely on your phone, and no other applications have access to it. So it's fine. Now, there's a whole bunch of legislation that's come into place, and we've been looking at this, just trying to figure out where the lines are. When you're doing this type of work, you got to know where the white, grey, and black lines are when it comes to computer security. So we'll post it as well. If you're interested in helping out and joining the community, we highly recommend you read this, because it details the legal parameters of what you are and not allowed to do when doing this type of research. Please read it. Internally, this is the database schema. This is the data that it collects. We've got a date timestamp that's for machines. We've got a human readable date. And then we have various fields. The message, I'm not going to get into the message and what the contents of that's in the Google Docs. The org for Singapore, that's SG_DTA, and that's got the properties of the mobile phone or the device that's been seen, and it's got the Bluetooth signal strength. That's it. That's the data. Now, there's been some really good write-ups about the contact tracing and the privacy aspects of it. Not just Kate, but have a look at the work that's been done by Vanessa here. It's really, really good. It's looking at some of the implications of it. But from right now, I feel the narrative needs to move past, is it secure or not secure, or is it private or not private, and not be so like Boolean and so binary, and start looking at like, let's just work on getting people into the application. I went down the street to pick up some shopping today, and I just asked the person at the checkout, and I'm in country Queensland, like, will you install the application? I goes, well, I've got no real concerns about the security of the application or the privacy, because I've got a lot of mobile apps on my phone. I'm all like, I haven't really come into contact with anyone with corona. And that's a really weird statement, because that basically means that person doesn't know, as someone working in on the checkout that comes into contact with a lot of people every day, they could be a super spreader. They don't know about asymptomatic infections. They could become infected or infect people without showing any signs. So really, this is marketing. There needs to be some big improvements on marketing, and I'm really concerned that, just like Mike Cannon-Brook said, put the angry mob off. We can, in time, we'll keep an eye on the privacy. We'll keep an eye on the computer security areas. But for now, we need to make sure we don't spook people, because if we spook people, the end result is going to be they never install. And if they never install, that's it. It never gets better. That opportunity to ship that software update that fixes that technical thing that technologists find that need to be fixed just won't happen. Thank you. All right, I'm going to drop all those links over into the chat, and thank you.
Awesome, thanks for that, Jeff. So a lot more meat to digest. We do still have a fair bit of discussion going on in the chat. We're getting a lot of questions through. We're between us responding to the ones that we can. We'll have a discussion. I'll have a discussion with the panel after this if there are lots of unanswered questions, and we'll figure out a way to get through them and get the information out there, whether that's another session like this or whether that's interviews and blog posts. We'll see, but we'll let you know. So next we come to the panel section, where we've got a number of questions that were submitted previously and some questions that have been submitted during the talks. The first of these questions I'm going to pass to Kate Carruthers. It's concerning the use or the choice of AWS, so Amazon Web Services, to host the data. Had a lot of questions, a lot of people saying, wouldn't we have been better off choosing a small Australian outfit? Weren't there alternatives? And Kate, I know you had some good thoughts on that, so I'll hand over to you now. You should appear. There you are.
Hi, thank you. I was actually really encouraged that the government chose Amazon, because one of the huge criticisms that me and a number of the tech community had when the census fail happened was that they hadn't just plonked it on Amazon and had a scalable solution. If they've got this app that many people are going to sign up for, they need something that they know will scale. Amazon was granted protected security status in Australia early last year, so it makes sense. So I don't see it's a bad choice. Yes, there are Australian companies that can offer similar kinds of services, and there may be a little bit of sour grapes there from some of them, but I think this is a safe choice. And I've spoken to some members of the dev team for this product, and you know, it's stored in Australia. It's I think it's a sensible approach.
Muted.
You're on mute.
Fantastic, did it again. Sorry, everyone. Yes, I was just saying thanks for that, Kate. I was going to pass back to Kate briefly because I know I've mentioned already that there have been lots of people working on this in addition to the people that you're seeing and hearing from tonight. And Kate, you mentioned a couple that you were keen to call out and just acknowledge.
No, I won't be acknowledging them. Their names will remain deeply secret. So I actually reached out to some mates who were on the dev team for this project, and it's quite a remarkable achievement. In a couple of weeks, they've got this product out to the market. It's been, from looking at what the guys have done with the code, you know, it looks reasonably solid. It's taken a sensible approach to security. It's taken a sensible approach to privacy, you know, and I asked them, you know, what was your approach? And they said They debated the user experience approach, to make it as easy as possible for people. And they had a huge focus on security and privacy. And I really, and there's an enormous amount of scrutiny on this app. So I think we can look to the team releasing code fixes as we speak. I think they'll come out, roll out over the next couple of days, start to roll out. And they are listening to all of this, and I suspect a whole bunch of them are actually listening in as this is happening. So I think this is an opportunity for a really constructive engagement between the government, their tech team, and the tech community. I think we can work together on this because this app is so fundamental to us being able to open up our businesses again. And if we can keep the infection rates down and track people who are infected, then we can all start to go about our business again. And that's important for opening up the economy.
Absolutely. Thanks ever so much for that, Kate. And yeah, agreed. This is all looking like we can all pull together and work and do something for the greater good. The next question that came in advance that I'll move on to next is, should the Australian government have just waited for Apple or Google to release their app and use this instead? Now, prior to passing that over to one of the panelists, I'll just point out that Apple and Google aren't releasing an app. They are adding capabilities to their operating systems that apps can use. So, Geoff, I'll bring you up for this, if that's good, to comment on it.
Cheers, Alec. Yeah, so they're adding capabilities to the operating system. So you still need an actual application. And it's really important to point out that a lot of people don't actually update their devices. Like, even if their devices can support doing software updates and it's a current device, doesn't mean that they'll update to get the underlying APIs exposed so the government can use it. So it's really important that we have an app that has one approach, and I hope in time the government updates the app to add the capability for these APIs and they get exposed. That way you just got two approaches of doing this. And in particular, on Android, there are a lot of devices that may never get software updates, older devices where just due to the nature of how Android was made, it's very fragmented. You've got a lot of handset manufacturers where their business is selling handsets. It's not deriving revenue from the Play Store, so they don't have incentives to have a unified ecosystem. Google has made a lot of changes to unify that in the last year and a half or so, and it's getting better, but it's more unified on iOS. But it's really important to do something now than wait, because even if we wait, they're still going to need to install an app. And even when they do install the app, doesn't mean that they have the underlying operating system APIs exposed, which will allow them to actually use. Thank you.
Oh, thanks for that, Geoff. The next question that I'll fire over to the panel is, can you clarify the usability of the app on an iPhone? Leaving it unlocked while in a public area is a risk to myself and my employer. Now, I've seen this asked a fair bit in our Q&A during the session, a fair bit on Twitter as well. I'll just say before handing this over, there are a couple of things at play here that Matt gave good descriptions of on the Android front. So the app is using Bluetooth Low Energy to detect when other phones running the app are nearby. So Matt talked about advertising, the phones advertising their presence so that they can be connected by the other apps. So in general, iOS does a pretty good job of detecting the other phones, but the issue is when it's sending out the rate at which it sends out or broadcasts that advert of its presence. That happens fairly consistently when the app is in the foreground. As soon as another app comes into the foreground or the phone is locked, that advertising rate is subject to some other factors. So all being well, it will carry on advertising, but that app then drops down in the priority of the access to which it has to the phone's Bluetooth resources, which means if another app comes to the foreground that requests access to the Bluetooth resources, the COVIDSafe app will come second in that argument. There are also some iOS services that can take priority as well. So basically, as soon as the app is not in the foreground, although it is still running, although it can still send out those advertising messages to an extent, it is subject to other factors. And those other factors can cause that frequency to decrease. They can actually cause the frequency to stop altogether. So I think the hope is that as and when Apple release their APIs, that there'll be something in place to address that. Matt, if I can hand over to you here as well. I know you did cover this a fair bit in your talk of the Android app, but if you could perhaps just reiterate and just say how Android is handling this, just for those who are jumping in now.
Could you repeat the question? I've been super distracted trying to answer as many questions as possible in the chat.
Okay, yeah, sure, no problem. So I was just talking about iOS and whether or not the app still functions when it's backgrounded or in lock mode, and how another app coming to the foreground or the iPhone being locked impacts the advertising frequency, the rate at which it broadcasts its presence. Now, I know you did touch on that when you walked through the Android app, but I think if you could just, the question is still being asked about functionality when the app's backgrounded. So if you could perhaps reiterate some of that and just give the Android viewpoint.
The Android viewpoint in relation to iOS?
Or just in relation to how well it functions when it's not in the foreground.
Oh, on Android,
what's the question?
It's absolutely perfectly fine. So the way that the Android app works is that it has what's called a service that runs in the background. So like, if you think of an app like a car, like you've got the exterior of it that you can see, so like the user interface, and then you've got the engine that you know is running, like you can feel it, but you can't see it. So a service is kind of much like the engine. It's always on under the hood, and it's kind of always doing the scanning and the advertising. Now, in the case of Android, it's a little bit interesting because it has what's called a startup receiver. So it kind of taps into the operating system's event system. So when your phone turns on, your phone basically goes, "Hey, I'm awake, everyone," and apps are like, "Oh, cool. I want to do something with that awake message." And COVIDSafe in that case then starts up the background service that does that monitoring. So Android just simply doesn't have these same concerns.
Okay, good to know. Thanks for that, Matt. I'll jump back to you in a second and then jump over to Jeff as well on this for the next question. Kate has touched on this already from reaching out to some of the devs of the app, and it's great to have that insight. But the question is, do you feel the app was rushed? How much UAT testing could really have been done? So Matt, I know you've talked about, had some comments on the code quality and just what the devs have actually achieved. Oh, okay, I'll jump over to Jeff while Matt's busy answering questions in the Q&A.
Yep. So repeat that again. I need to really start paying more attention to the actual panel.
Okay, that's all right. I'm answering people's questions. I don't know what you're thinking. The question was, do you feel the app was rushed? How much UAT testing could really have been done? I just mentioned that Kate had commented on what the devs have achieved, but I know in our discussions you talked about your view of what the devs have achieved in the time that they had.
Do I feel the app was rushed? That's a good question. So in terms of what I've seen in the code base, so some of the concepts and the architectural ideas and the thought that's gone into how the app was put together, they're kind of markers that it's been built quite well. Like from an engineering architectural perspective, it's using some very, very sound engineering practices. So things like use cases, there's a mention of a repository, using technologies like refit. It's a good app. Like under the hood, it's been built well. Now, being rushed, I'm not sure that it's relevant. Like what I'm seeing is good engineering quality, and that's kind of all it comes down to. They may have had, at an estimate, maybe 6 weeks So you go, Kate?
Mm-hmm.
I was just going to say, I really think also we've got the good engineering that you've pointed out, Matthew, is also we've got the intense amounts of scrutiny that the entire tech community is putting on it, the privacy advocates are putting on it. You know, the Australian Privacy Commissioner is saying that they're watching it. You know, people like Dr. Vanessa Teague are focused on it. And the worst that Vanessa can say about this is there's one little thing about the Bluetooth that she'd like to get fixed before she puts it on her phone. So she's saying she'll put it on in a couple of weeks, she's quoted as saying. So I think that's kind of message. I'm probably going to wait until after the legislation's through, because I'm kind of crazy like that. I like the legislation to be in place.
Okay, can I pass to you as well, Jeff, for some comments on this from what you've seen in the code?
Yeah, sure thing. All right, so I've done a lot of consulting in my life and looking at mobile phone projects and rescuing mobile phone projects. I would say this hits the definition of a really good MVP, and they should be congratulated for what they've done in a short time frame. As for the application and the quality, my main concerns come from the fact that I think the code base was received like maybe a month ago, and that means there's a month worth of progress that's in the Singapore version that might be missing from the Australian version. And that's where my concerns lie, is how do we get those software improvements integrated and remove the maintenance burden of having to manually integrate it. If all the countries are working on a singular code base, then as each country improves, it gets better. The application's good. I can see that there is some refactoring missing when I compare the source code that's been decompiled to the source code that's from Singapore. That leads to my theory that it's a little bit older. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't install it. You should install it, because if you don't install it, we'll never get the opportunity to actually improve. So I'm happy with it.
Okay, thanks for that, Jeff. And yeah, that is very interesting to get all that feedback from lots of independent researchers. So we've had a question that I just wanted to put to the whole panel one by one now. I just may find it in my list for the right wording. It's basically, the question is basically asking if any of us involved in this presentation have any affiliations, like anything that might be motivating us to come out and say the things that we're saying. So if I could pass that to you first, Troy, to just give us a comment on that.
I don't want to get sick, and I want to be able to go outdoors to restaurants again. Like that's my motivation. I mean, it's that and just a severe dislike of FUD, but no financial motivation, government affiliations, anything like that. No.
Awesome, thanks for that. If I can put you up next, Kate, for your comments on that.
So I'm not a fan of the Morrison government, and I often voice that opinion, but I'm pretty comfortable with the approach that's been taken with this app, and I think it's essential if we're going to get back out and get back to business, which is the next stage that we need to go through. And the other thing is this app really just takes the public health process that we do manually and puts it on our phones. And it makes it much more efficient. So as long as the government is responsive to the tech community's feedback and incorporates it, I think this is a good approach. As I said, I'm not going to put it on my phone just yet because I really want the legislation in place because they've promised it. But I will put it on as soon as that is passed.
Okay, fair enough. Thanks, Kate. Matt, I'll bring you up next just to comment on affiliations, which you may have mentioned already. And then I'm going to add the question, have you got it on your phone?
My affiliations. So I'm an independent app developer. I work for myself. I've got customers in healthcare and mining. And as I said earlier, I also built a tool called mFactor that quite a few developers around the world use. So I am happily independent and free from the man. And yeah, I am not in any way associated with the government. So I've put my LinkedIn into the live Q&A, so you can all kind of have a sticky beak at what I do.
Cool. And the second part, do you have the app on your phone right now?
Oh yeah,
Apart
of course I
from the
do.
one you. Cool.
Yeah. After I saw the source code, I was like, yeah, that's all right.
Cool. All right. So Jeff, if I bring you up next, I think you did mention this earlier on, but just so we've all done it in the same spot, any affiliations to mention?
Sure. Absolutely no affiliations. I saw a mate of mine saying that people were dissecting it, and I realized I had the time and capacity too. And I just really haven't slept much for the last 72 hours, just putting together and coordinating, speaking with media, pulling up the source code online, building the community, and just going for the application. It's just genuine, pure, good at heart and intent. And on a more personal note, I'm actually separated from my partner, and I live in Queensland, and my partner's in New South Wales, which means my kids are actually in New South Wales. For me to actually get my children, you wouldn't believe the amount of paperwork I had to do and the amount of border crossings and how difficult that is. I need to return my children back down to New South Wales before Mother's Day. And like, if New South Wales escalates and the borders close, like, how can I return them down? Like, so it's on a personal level, I need to get this fixed because it's making life very difficult.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. That's, yeah, very interesting human perspective there. It's good to know. Just for my part, to the extent I'm contributing, also independent, I run a small app development consultancy, but no affiliations, wasn't involved in the development of this app in any way. So the next question I'll move on to, and I'll bring you in, Troy, for this one if I can, as a first comment. What happens to the data collected that is further than 1.5 meters or shorter than 15 minutes? What level of security, or rather, how secure is the deletion after 21 days and when the app is uninstalled? Now, I'm not sure we can answer that because that's resident on the server, but Troy, I'm wondering if you can give some general kind of industry standard comments on data retention that may come into play here.
Yeah, so and actually, I'd really like to chuck it to Matt or Jeff after I do this maybe intro bit to it, because I'm kind of curious as well about part of that in terms of technical implementation. But I guess that the sort of the two principles we're talking about here are, number one, data minification. So how can we have only the bare amount of what we actually need? And from everything I've seen, the app does not collect anything beyond what it actually needs to function, which is a pretty key principle. And the other one, of course, is the shortest possible retention periods. Now, from what I know of the virus, not a health professional, it seems like the last 21 days is around about that sweet spot, because you could be asymptomatic for a period, but beyond that last 3 weeks, is there any value? Well, probably not. And then, of course, there's the question about what happens on the server, and I've actually seen this come up in the live Q&A a few times, where it's like, hey, you can pull the app apart, and that's fantastic, but you've got no idea what's happening on the server, which is a fair comment. And look, I mean, it would be great to see the APIs open source as well, but then of course we would have to trust that the provided source is what's running on the server, and there'll always be people who don't believe that. But what I think would be an interesting question there as well, and this goes back to sort of my intro where we're comparing positions, is if you test positive and the data is uploaded to the server, that is obviously a lot of information about your interactions. Now, of course, that's also information about the fact that you've tested positive. My curious question is, and this even relates to the question about do we trust AWS, a bunch of people have been mentioning Cloud Act, things like this. Without the app, if you test positive, where does the data go? I don't know the answer to that, but I would be curious, because I think that the difference between these two things is where the discussion should be, because you might find it goes to an AWS server anyway, it's just not part of COVIDSafe. So anyway, that's my views on it. I'd be curious to hear from the two guys that have been pulling it apart about particularly how they discard data that doesn't meet that threshold.
Awesome. Yeah, Matt's hand is going up, and you're next in the queue, so you'll be on screen in 2 seconds. There you are. Go for it.
Yeah, okay. So data retention. I can comment on data retention from a on-device perspective. So in one of my tweets in that little thread that I put online, in my findings, what I found is there's a component called a broadcast receiver, and that can effectively like get wired into time events inside the Android operating system. It can be wired into any event, but for the sake of argument, we'll use time events. And in this case, it runs periodically, and it basically does a check on all the data points in the database. It says if any of these points are older than 21 days, I want you to discard the ones that are 21 days, that are 22 days or older. So it's automatic, and because it's using a standard tech stack, it's using SQLite. This is an industry standard that's installed on every single device, like iOS and Android device. Most apps use it. Like, we can understand what it's doing, and it is deleting 21 days older data.
Awesome. Okay, thanks for that, Matt. Okay, so if I move on to the next question that came in, if the source is unprotected and able to be reverse engineered, as we've seen, wouldn't it be easy to make a change, add some malicious code, and republish? Now, interesting question. Yeah, I see Matt's hand going up. I'll pass over to you in a second. So yeah, look, iPhones are always touted as being safe with regard to this, unless it's jailbroken. So Matt, I know you did mention that earlier. I would be keen, as part of what you're about to say, to find out whether you've come across anything in the Android code base that is checking whether or not the device is rooted and taking any action based on that.
That's actually interesting. That's not an aspect that I looked for. I will investigate that after this, and I will hopefully add some more information. I have to stop reading. So, question again, sorry.
I've got to do the same. I've also been reading between this. So with the source not being obfuscated and
that's right,
to reverse engineer it, can it be changed maliciously and republished?
Okay, so I've answered this a few times, and I think a lot of these concerns, I suspect, stem from one particular tweet and one particular author online. Yes, you could do that. You could absolutely take this code. You could change it and then publish it online. However, there's a few things that are in place that'll prevent this from, I guess, reaching a scale that it's going to be a problem. One is if you wanted to publish under the original Australian government account, which is where all the downloads are happening through, you need their signing credentials. You need the security key that's used to basically digitally sign the application and say, yes, I'm this app. If that happened, all bets are off. That's a huge problem, because it's a massive compromise. But from I want to make a duplicate app and publish it online, I think you have to take a couple of steps back and kind of think about that. You can publish an app that is effectively a spoof of the government's app, but this is a standard phishing attack, right? We get this all the time through like PayPal links via email. The SMS, like phishing attack from yesterday, is a classic example. And phishing attacks, you can usually you can verify them, right? So looking at things like the download count, the amount of reviews, these are really going to be really, really good indicators that show if this app is malicious or not. And Google and Apple will be keeping a really, really close eye on anything related to COVID on the stores, particularly these kind of apps. So, I mean, if you try to upload an app that is obviously malicious, their review processes are more than likely going to catch it. And you're going to get a big slap on the hand for it. So I don't think it's something that is worth worrying about. Like, you're probably more, concerns should probably more be focused on falling for those SMS phishing attacks that we've been seeing. They're far more likely to have an impact than a compromised clone of this app.
Okay, thanks for that, Matt. So basically there's kind of cheaper attack vectors if anybody is wanting to be a malicious actor. The next question I'll pass to Geoff and then over to you as well for comments, Kate, I think, for some input from the circles that you move in. While the app seems to be above board now and has the general approval of the tech community, could that theoretically change with a future update? A lot of people just auto update. So Geoff, if you could give us some comments on that.
Yeah, sure. So right now there's a lot of scrutiny on the application. We've formed a community to allow us to actually go through it, and you bet your bottom dollar when a new update's released, like it might go a little bit quiet in the next couple of days because now the findings are being published. But when that update does get released, we're going to want to see, was those onboarding defects fixed? Has there been any implementations of APIs that shouldn't be used, for example, GPS? And there's no reason that can't be programmatically done. All the steps that Matt actually showed of like visiting a website, downloading a zip file, unzipping it, decompiling it, that can be automated. And if you can automate it, then you can do some analysis of it in an automated fashion. You could actually look for usage of the GPS APIs or other things like that. We can, if it's stored on GitHub, we could make automation that could publish that source, the decompiled source code, on a version by version basis and diff it, right? And then when we're doing the review, we're not looking at two separate copies, we're looking at diffs and we can see the changes. So yes, it is possible for someone to push out an update and for it to auto update, but there's a lot of scrutiny on this thing right now, so I don't think it's a concern.
All right, thanks, Geoff. So if I can pass over to you as well, Kate, to see if you've got a view on this yourself and based on the people that you've chatted to who've been involved in the development.
Yeah, and although I've got extensive experience in the commercial sector, I've also worked for state and federal government in ICT roles. And one thing that I'm seeing here is there seems to have been a genuine attempt to do a good thing here on the part of the government and the project team. I suspect that any problems that arise in future will probably be accidental rather than malicious. You know, and I've been heavily critical of things like the Robodebt program and things. So, you know, for me to be saying this, you got to believe it, because like I slag them off all the time for Robodebt because I think it's a disgusting program. So I think that we're all going to be watching. Everybody's going to decompile this. If it's not open sourced in the near future, people are just going to decompile it and look at it themselves anyway. They've not made any attempt to obfuscate the code, so they're obviously not trying to hide anything. So they could have done a bunch of stuff so that we couldn't decompile this and reverse engineer it. So that's the other thing that I think we need to look at. I will say, though, that people who are in at-risk categories should think twice about installing this app. So people who are victims of domestic violence, people who may be at risk for other location-based technology risks, they should really think carefully about it. But I can't see any reason why other people shouldn't feel relatively safe, especially after the discussion that we've had tonight. And as I said, I'm going to install it. I'm just going to wait a bit. So I'm not saying no, I'm just saying not yet.
Awesome, and again, fair enough. Thanks very much for that, Kate. Move on to the next question. I'm not sure if we will be able to answer this, but I'll put it out there in case anybody has any thoughts. The government is highlighting app download numbers, but the key really is to understand how many of those users actually registered and are keeping the app open in the foreground where that helps. Matt, if I can pass that to you and then just see what your thoughts are on that, and then Geoff will come to you after that as well.
This is a great question because it kind of reinforces some of the findings. They, apart from using the Google and Apple analytics, they can't. There's no analytics in the app to tell them that information. So it's really confirming the findings that we've been saying. It doesn't track, like there's no kind of tracking like that. And they can't get that information because they're simply just not tracking it.
Okay, fair enough. I guess that's a good reflection from a privacy perspective. Geoff, did you want to have any comments on that as well?
Matt answered it perfectly.
All right. Not the only question where that's happened, I'm sure. Okay, the question, I was saving this question till last. I'm assuming the answers might be a little bit longer, so we'll do it now, and then if there is time at the end, we might hang on a couple of shorter ones. But the question was, I believe that as a community of experts, we need to cut through all the technology and provide a clear, simple endorsement to the general public about whether or not to install the app. If you agree, what would your own recommendation be, and what, if any, caveats would you insist on? So Matt, if we can start with you, and then we'll work our way through everybody. There's no escaping this one.
Just to confirm, that's do I think the app is worth installing, and any caveats?
And safe to install, yes.
Yep, from what I've seen, and just kind of to recap what I posted in my Twitter thread, I don't see any issues with it. I have it installed on both my phones, because I'm a developer, multiple phones, and I'm comfortable with what I've seen.
Awesome, great to hear. So Jeff, if we can just get your take on that as well.
Yeah, it's installed on my phones. The prototypes that you showed at the beginning of, so that mock-up that you showed at the beginning of this broadcast was me taking screenshots of myself enrolling in the application. I have no concerns. I had concerns at first, but I went through the source code and saw what it was. It's really simple. I would love to see the source code released, and then we'd be able to look at the iOS version and be able to answer some of these things in a more articulate way. We have some ideas and theories about how to improve the iOS side of things. I would love to have a contact with another engineer who actually built the application. We need to do NDAs, that's fine with me. But I just want to help make this work. Thank you.
Awesome, thanks Jeff. Troy, if I can bring you up next to get your view on this.
Yeah, look, I did install it, but that's because Matt and Jeff said it was okay. Look, in all seriousness, it's a lot of my confidence comes from the fact that there are people like Matt and Jeff ensuring that it does actually do what's on the box, so to speak. And for all the suspicions people have over governments, and many of the suspicions are very well warranted given some of the previous projects and privacy violations, don't get me wrong, but the proof is in the pudding, and we are now starting to see that. And I just find it quite interesting how the narrative of people that are against the project is starting to change now that we do actually have the nuts and bolts of how it works. And I think we're just simply not going to change some people's mind because government, but for everyone that wants to look at the evidence, look at what it actually does, we've got great visibility now, and I just want to thank Matt and Jeff for the work they've done as well.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks for that, Troy. Kate, if I can bring you up on this as well, I know you kind of have pretty much answered this already, but yeah, there was an additional question relevant to you that we've got some people asking in the Q&A, specifically what legislation you're waiting for.
So, oh gosh, it's on my paper. So the legislation that governs this and some regulations are yet to be debated in Parliament because they need to reconvene. So that's what I'm waiting for. And I read John Coyne's article on ASPI. I think it was on the 16th of April that it came out, where should I download the coronavirus tracing app? Here's how to decide. That's a really good summary of his process, and I don't see anything now, from what we've heard, that isn't covered off on that in that article. And so I think it's worth looking at. I really want to thank everybody for their efforts, because a lot of us are busy with our day jobs and working from home and all the challenges of that. So I'm really grateful for the time that you people have taken to do this for us. Thank you.
Thanks, Kate, and yeah, special thanks for those thanks at the end. And I just want to make sure that is extended to the community at large, in addition to the people that we've got speaking here tonight. Just for my money, when it comes to that, endorse it or otherwise, as I said, I've got it installed. But I'd like to circle back to one of Troy's earlier comments about AWS and asking the question, how is what's happening now different from what would be happening if the process was done manually? I kind of think even if there are still any reservations or concerns about the app itself, at least it should be bringing in some automation and resilience and accuracy to a process that prior to this would have been done manually, would have been very time consuming and prone to human error in a way that this hopefully isn't. So hopefully we've made some good steps forward there. We do have time for one more question that I've seen coming in from the Q&A, and this is one for you, Troy, specific to data breaches, and it's someone asking for a view on what is the risk if a data breach were to somehow occur based on the information that we've seen being captured as part of this?
Well, it won't going to have been pwned because there's no email addresses, no passwords. There's no passwords either, so it's not much use to me. I think what we've got to think about, I mean, let's run the most likely scenario in terms of a breach that is impactful. So a breach that is impactful would be the contact tracing data that had been uploaded to the government server, which of course we know is in AWS. So what would we have then? We'd have a whole bunch of encrypted IDs. We'd have to have a breach not just of the stored data, but also of the private key, because obviously everything's encrypted on the client first. So we're talking about a very, very bad breach that would need many things to go wrong. So I would put likelihood as low. And then of course, what's the impact? Well, the worst case scenario with the impact is you get to see a list of people who had contracted the virus, and you get to see IDs of the other devices that they've come into contact with. That and look, let's be clear that this would be bad. It would be the biggest front page news story we've had probably since the start of the pandemic. The question that I would sort of rhetorically put back again is how does this change from what we have already? Because the only time this data gets uploaded is if you test positive. If you don't have the app and you test positive, I guarantee you will go into a government database somewhere. What would happen if that government database gets breached? It's effectively worse than this situation, because it's not just going to be a name and a postcode and some de-identified anonymous interactions. It's going to be far, far, far more expensive. So look, I don't think it'll be good. I think the likelihood is extremely low, and I think in the broader scheme of this whole pandemic and the way the government is handling it, this is not going to be something that's certainly that concerns me.
Okay, thanks for that, Troy. It's very, very useful to know. Matt, one more question pulling out of the Q&A now that I'll send over your way. It's probably more of a general comment on app security and sandboxing of the data that apps have access to. Is there a possibility or chance that any other existing app like Facebook on our phones sends an update which pulls out data from the COVIDSafe app while it is running? So I'm sure this would be useful to just clarify for a lot of people.
Oh, that's a good question. There's a couple of, I guess, like nuances to that. I would need to investigate if they can tap into Bluetooth signal. That could be one vector. I would need to investigate that, so I can't comment for sure. In terms of reading the database that's being recorded, they would need to be able to get access to your private data store, to the application. Now, to do that on a non-jailbroken phone, you would need to effectively have what's called a 0-day. So they would need to have their own security exploit that they can use to kind of manipulate the operating system to do what they want. I think it's extremely unlikely, I would say.
Okay, fair enough. Geoff, do you want to comment on that?
Sure, just quickly. Yeah, so my exactly what Matt said. The data is stored via the Room database API. It's self-contained in it, and it's sandboxed. You can't get access to that data. Now, it is possible for, like, say, cloud backups type thing. If they're not encrypted, that you could maybe extract it out. That's a potential scenario. But if you're thinking about a scenario of, say, domestic violence, and you're worried about someone getting access to your phone to be able to look at the data, they can't access the data unless they root or jailbreak your phone. If they do that, it factory resets your phone on Android, so you can't get that data. I'd be more worried about Google Maps history in those types of scenarios. I'm sure Kate has so much more to say. Thank you.
Yeah, let's pass the floor over to Kate.
Kate had her hand up just before.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just looking at it from the perspective of a potential attacker. So some cyber villain is going to try and get this data. So what value? I think everybody's enumerated really clearly. There's not much value in it for a potential cyber breach perpetrator. So there could be the fact that it might be a state actor that wants to embarrass the government, but there's easier ways to embarrass a government, quite frankly. So I don't think that's going to be really the issue. And as Geoff pointed out, the data is fairly secure. So I'm not seeing the external interest in hacking this particular system. And I think if there was email in the picture with phishing attacks, there would be much more of an attack vector than anything. But I don't see it.
Awesome, thanks, Kate. I think it's been pointed out by a few of us now as well that if that potentially changes a little if you're in an at-risk group, potentially in a domestic violence situation, and your phone is already jailbroken or rooted prior to the app being installed. Let's pause in case any hands go up to comment on that. I think Kate, let's jump back to Kate.
No, and that is a real risk with domestic violence victims. So the mobile phone is the primary mechanism by which domestic violence perpetrators seek to control their victims nowadays. So that's why I am saying if you are in that situation, stay away from mobile phones. But try not to install apps and really reset your phone to factory settings often, because that'll typically clear them out, a lot of them.
Cool, thanks, Kate. Certainly useful information to get out there. So at this point, I think we'll bring this session to a close. I know there are more questions that people probably want us to go through. So as I said, I'll discuss those with the panel at a later date, and we'll see if there's a way to get responses to anything else if responses are required and get those out to you. It just remains for me to thank each of the panel members. Troy Hunt, thank you ever so much for joining us on this and offering your opinions. Kate, again, thanks ever so much for coming and joining and bringing your perspective. Matt, thanks awesomely for getting us started on this and getting us started down this route and getting access to the information. And Geoff, also thanks for your investigations, and thanks for the coordination you've done for the tech community in general to make this a real, let's say, coordinated response. The session has been recorded. I'll hopefully get something out to you fairly soon as to how and when you can access that. I'll pause for a second in case anybody wants to have any final words or if anything we've not covered. One from Geoff, so let me just put you up on screen and you're good to go.
Yeah, it's just reiterating a point I've made a few times. I'm super easily contactable. I'd really like engineers from the actual agencies that have built the application to get in contact. There's stuff that we want to discuss and we don't have proper channels. And if we don't have those proper channels, we just put it in the Google Doc. And next thing you know, it's very easy for someone to take technical content out of context, and then we've got a bad news story again. So I'd like to establish proper channels. Thank you.
Awesome, thanks, Geoff. And then, with a bit of luck, somebody's listening who can respond to that, and we can see if we can make some progress. So with that, I'll say thank you to everyone for coming along, and I'll bring the session to an end. Thanks a lot. Bye for now.